It's Trundl Talks. It's Trundl Talks. It's Trundl Talks.
Welcome, Kathy. Thank you for joining us on Trundl Talks. We're very grateful that you had time and we'll be able to talk about mindfulness in agile and software development practices in today's talk.
No problem. Great. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So before we begin, Kathy, I would like to hear your thoughts on what is mindfulness and how can it help in today's changing software development scenario?
It's such an important thing to understand, but when we talk about mindfulness, there's so much confusion about what it is and what it isn't, because it is kind of a broad thing. It is a little bit sort of mushy, but there's a lot of science behind it. So at its core, the most basic way to think about mindfulness, it's really about an awareness. And it's awareness of anything that's going on, just being present. So I quite often like to think about mindfulness by thinking about what the opposite is, which is mindlessness. And many of you probably have the same experience I have done, I don't know how many times. You're driving along, you're coming home from work, or you're going from anywhere to anywhere in the car, and you arrive at your home or your work or wherever, and you have no recollection of the driving. You don't know whether you stopped at the traffic lights, whether there was pedestrians. You don't remember the trip because you're thinking. And you're thinking kind of automatically, and your mind just wanders here and there. And you're not really aware of what's in front of you. So that's the opposite of mindfulness, I guess. So mindfulness is really that awareness of what is going on in your thoughts, what is in front of you, what are you seeing, what are you hearing, what are you feeling, what are you touching, and being present to it. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't think, because thinking is completely fine, but it's about what are you thinking. So it's really about what really is happening in your thoughts, in your sensations. In Agile, it's for me, I've been an Agile practitioner from about 2005-ish, but then also I did some earlier Agile practices back in the 1990s when I was a software developer myself. I think with software developers, we are so busy sometimes, we get so lost in the busy work that we're doing in our Agile team, sometimes we lose awareness of what's happening with the team. What does the customer really want? What's happening with the vision? What's the purpose? And we just so much think about our own self and we forget or lose touch of that awareness. So we need to kind of check in and just kind of bring back to mind, oh, hang on a minute, what's really happening here? What's my team really need? What does the customer really want here?
Sure, perfect. And how do you think, when we talk about mindfulness and mental wellness, how do you think it can incorporate into the everyday task? So I understand when it comes to, the vision aspect of it, and when you talk about, okay, this is what my team needs to deliver. But when it comes to everyday tasks, so let's say for a normal developer or somebody who's, working on his testing tasks throughout the day, how can it help with that?
Yeah, it can really help. For me, there's a couple of different ways it can help. First thing is about focus and concentration. Especially today when we're working at home, there's so many temptations, so many distractions. So what mindfulness can do is, so often we allow ourselves to be distracted. We say, oh, I'm just going to quickly check my phone, or I'm just going to quickly do something. So what mindfulness can do is kind of say, hang on, do I really want to change my attention, or do I want to stay focused here? So there's a way of mindfulness kind of bringing that awareness of I'm distracted. Let's resist this distraction and stay on focus. Of course, sometimes the phone rings and you need to talk to people, but when it's distractions that really you shouldn't allow yourself to be distracted, it's kind of keeps you on task and say, no, I'm going to resist. I can be aware that my mind is distracted, and I can sort of go, no, I can choose that I'm going to stay here, because mindfulness has this aspect of understanding where is your attention, where does it need to be, and then trying to make sure that if our attention does wander, that we can keep it on focus, because that for me happens a lot, no matter whether you're a software developer or an Agile team or not. the number one thing that I think is important with mindfulness as well is when we think about Agile, it's a mindset. Yeah. It's a mindset of flexibility, of teamwork, of maximizing value, of dealing with change. And unfortunately, change has this habit of people kind of being resistant or getting stressed about it. So mindfulness can say, hang on a minute. This is the Agile mindset that says change is expected. Yeah. Let's just let go of these reactions and just figure out, right, now what do we do, rather than mulling it over and we tell ourselves stories, oh, I shouldn't have done that, or it shouldn't have happened that way, or why did that happen? And we can get kind of worked up about it just because our minds are mulling it over and over and over again, whereas mindfulness allows us to stop that sort of cycle and say, okay, the Agile mindset says we need to change, let's just go forward now. And so we go forward in a more considered way, a bit more kind of conscious, rather than that kind of automatic thought processes that can lead to these tension or stress.
Sure. So, Kathy, one question I want to ask you, and what I was doing was I read up a lot of articles. That you had done, and I was fortunate enough to attend this session that you had delivered on agility today, where you talked about, responding versus reacting. And a lot of information you mentioned where a lot of teams are reacting to, challenges that are coming and not responding. Can you shed some light on that? How is it different, and what benefits can it bring to a team when it comes to responding to a change or responding to a difficult situation rather than reacting to it?
Yeah, that to me is the number one challenge that everybody has. So when we say react, we're meaning the way that something happens. Maybe we get an email and we read it, and it's perhaps maybe saying something criticizing of your work, or something changed, which means that you're not happy because it means you have to do something. So and it happens to all of us, right? Something comes in an email or a Slack comment or something on Jabber, depending on what tools you're using, and you read it and straight away, almost like a reflex, your mind starts pricking up. We start getting tense, we might get a bit angry, a bit frustrated, and that feelings, those triggers, it's basically because the way that we've perceived or interpreted that message, our internal brain sees as a threat. So it says, oh, I'm threatened now, just like if we were being attacked by a tiger or something. So it floods our body with these chemicals, and those chemicals are the fight and flight chemicals. So your body's all ready to run or to fight or to whatever. So when your body's got all these chemicals, and this is all kind of a very neurological kind of reaction, when we're in that state, we're not responding from our prefrontal cortex, our kind of intelligent brains. So what we do is we go into kind of like a reflex mode, like an automatic mode, because we're ready to fight, we straight away start writing an email, or we write a harsh comment to our colleague, or maybe we snap at someone. Because we're sort of overtaken in this automatic mode, we're barely even aware of what we're doing. So that's the reactive brain, which is the way that we're built. This is being human. It's nothing wrong with it. It is, and it's the way we are. What mindfulness can do, and again, it's a practice. It does take a while to kind of really be able to get it, is you can read the email, you look at it, and you can say, before I start reacting, I can pause and say, what's happening inside of me? What am I feeling? What am I thinking? What are my emotions? How am I seeing this? What am I interpreting here? So before we kind of jump straight in and react, we've got that moment to kind of hang on a minute, let's come back and be aware. And then from that point of awareness, I can go, what's the best thing I should do here? Should I write that nasty email, or should I go off? Or maybe I can just take that moment to breathe and say, what would be a more constructive way to respond? What's a better way to deal with this information, this situation, that is wiser, that is more careful, so our teams can stay focused and stay on track without causing these little tensions that can happen when we do things without that kind of checking in process. So it really allows us to ensure that we're not causing demotivation and tension in the team, that we're doing something that's constructive and helpful for the team, which without that pause, sometimes we can, jump in too fast and find later that someone doesn't like us and, or someone kind of takes our reaction the wrong way. And then suddenly you have this spiral of the whole team being tense, where if we all stopped and just thought about what's the best thing to do here, what's the wisest thing to do here, it could remove that tension and, of course, ultimately create stronger teamwork, more cohesive teams and happier people, of course.
Yeah. So, Kathy, just adding on to this. So, from your experience, from what you've seen, while implying or implementing these practices, have you seen a difference in the teams who try to implement the mindful practices on their daily task, as we spoke about earlier, and like responding versus reacting? Do you think, again, it coming from somebody who's from a third perspective, can it be misled, or can it show like it's being delayed? So like, for example, if a client asks for something and you react, and rather than clients ask for something and you respond to it. So I clearly see the difference when I heard you talk and I read a lot about it. But I personally, what my first reaction was, a lot of times people will interpret this as delay, or taking more time than coming back to me with whatever the first response should have been.
Yes. So it's not meant to be give me an hour. It's literally that there's this kind of a watcher, someone who's watching yourself is watching your own thoughts. So there's this element that as soon as something happens, you're immediately saying, whoop. So it's literally just one breath, and that's all it takes to hang on. It's just hang on, and then we go. So that pause is literally only a few seconds, but it's enough to stop you perhaps blurting something out of your mouth or writing something without that consideration, that checking in of, hang on, what could be wrong here? So it's not a case of, all right, I have to wait an hour. It's something that allows you to just check back in with yourself, check in what you're thinking, check, is this the right thing to do before we go forward? Because we still have to get on and do our work and reply, but the reply then isn't kind of short and perhaps not quite adequate. Maybe that reply can be done, but it's just a lot more, considered and calm. So it's not
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's not about forgetting about what's happened. You still have to deal with difficult situations, but it's coming at maybe a difficult situation from a calm point of view rather than a stressed point of view. So you're still doing it, and you're doing it kind of immediately, but without that automatic, because the issue that most people, and myself too, don't get me wrong, I'm just as bad. I might have been practicing for 20 years, but sometimes, stopping and having that minute to mindfully check in, that takes a bit of practice to be able to stop yourself, because we're so used to just being in autopilot mode, just like the driving. You don't remember the drive. It's the same thing. It's minds are so used to just reacting that sometimes we react before we even realize it,
I agree.
Yeah.
So that is when it comes to the written or the passive kind of communication. What about active? So like if you're having a conversation with somebody, how can you make that change in that scenario?
Yeah, that's really important. Of course, right now we're not face to face in the same room, so it's a bit harder. So there's two parts. When we think of face to face communication, it's about how do we send out our message, how do we talk, and then how do we listen? Mm-hmm. Now, listening is just as important as talking. So the listening part is, am I listening, or is my mind thinking about the next thing I want to say, or is my mind perceiving and misinterpreting things. You know, that inner voice. Is that inner voice criticizing? Is that inner voice judging? Is that inner voice perhaps hearing the information and going, oh, well, I don't think that, or I disagree with that, because that inner voice is chatty, chatty, chatty. So mindfulness, when we're listening, allows us to kind of say, inner voice, just be quiet for a minute. I want to listen, and I want to listen openly. I want to hear this person and be present for them. So that can remove a lot of those reactions because of the way that our inner voice is perceiving the information. So we can actually hear it in a more clear way. We don't have all those misinterpretations because we are listening properly and fully. So that's the first half. And then the second half, we can take in that information and with that mindful awareness say, okay, now what's really happening? Am I, again, making sure that I'm not reacting? And I have that moment to just kind of take a breath, hear the information, and then make sure that what I'm about to say, if I'm about to have a comment, that how am I saying it? Am I saying it kindly? Am I saying it clearly? Am I saying it in a way that can be misinterpreted? Or am I saying it in a way that is going to be easy to understand for the other person? Because we can't make someone adapt to our way, but we can adapt to them. So maybe I'm working with a hire manager who wants really concise facts, or maybe I'm dealing with an engineer who wants a lot of detail. I can think to myself, what is the best way to talk to them based on their needs and their likes? And so mindfulness allows us to kind of check in and, again, respond in a more what's the right word? The way that it suits them the best, rather than just blurting out our way. Because we live in our own heads so often, we forget that other people don't think the same way as us. They don't work the same way as us. Each of us are slightly different. So when we're communicating face-to-face, mindfulness can help us check in to say, how can I work well with this person given our communication styles and, of course, the situation at hand?
Sure. Thank you, Kathy. One question that I want to ask is, how do you think it can impact coaches? So if, like, as an Agile coach, you're trying to impart, the learnings of Agile or the principles or the fundamentals of Agile with your team, or when you're trying to, bring in the concept of change for somebody who's been working in the standard life cycle for a long while, how can you use these tips or learnings from, mindfulness into delivering that kind of change to an organization for a coach?
Yeah, and as a coach, I think it's even more important. I'm a coach myself, and it's easy to think that, oh, I'm coaching you, and then you see who you're coaching not doing the right thing or being resistant or not understanding. And straight away, our mind can start judging. Oh, don't they know? Or, our internal voice can start that terrible dialogue, judging them, criticizing them with that thing, not understanding them. And that can also lead us to become frustrated and say, why don't they just understand? Why can't they just do it what I told them? Which we all do. So once again, mindfulness enables us to come with a bit more kindness and say, it's a difficult thing, this agile mindset. It is a difficult thing to remember that, going from one thing to another, they themselves are going through change, and change has this habit of stressing people out, and it's not easy because we like to be comfortable. So when we're changing and working with teams to be more agile, regardless of where they started, it can be challenging for them. So mindfulness allows us to be a little bit more understanding and prevent us from all those expectations that we place on people that they should be able to just get it like we do. Because as a coach, of course, we're a coach because we've experienced in it. So it helps us to sort of say, okay, we shouldn't expect that they're the same as me. They are them. They're going through difficulties. They are having trouble letting go of their older waterfall methods or their old governance or their old practices. So we need to be a bit more, dare I say it, compassionate and have more empathy to say it's difficult, so we can stop ourselves from acting frustrated and short and take on a bit more patience by saying, I understand, and we truly just understand, not just say we understand. The amount of times people say, oh, I understand, and then they don't show anything. So it really helps us to truly understand, put ourselves in their shoes and say, yes, I remember when I became or learned Agile, this was difficult for me. So it gives you that ability to be a bit kinder.
Yeah. Thank you, Kathy. The last question that I have is regarding the current scenario where, everybody is sitting in their home. We're all stuck at our home, basically. And how do you think how important mindfulness is when it comes to, kind of like the secluded environment that we are working in now? Like everybody is on a computer screen that you see, and you work with teams which are ideally supposed to be, close-knit fabric where all of them are working together. How do you think mindfulness can help that?
It is a really important thing to discuss, that when we look at some of the surveys that have been undertaken recently, people love working at home for some reasons, close to family. You don't have to go out in the weather. You don't have to commute the hours on a train or in the car. So these are really positive things. But unfortunately, the biggest finding people are having is the feeling of loneliness, of disconnection, of difficulties collaborating and communicating. So these things are a little bit unavoidable. But when we think of mindfulness and being at home, our ability to, keep in front of mind the awareness that the team is still there. Even though it's a screen, and even now I'm talking to a screen, effectively, I know that you're there. I can see a photo of you. I can see the video of you, but you're not physically here. And the mind, still says, oh, I'm sort of talking to myself. But when we're working in a team, we need to sort of be a bit more mindful to say, how can we keep that sense of connection? How can we keep it as if we were face to face, and mindfully say, I'm not talking to a screen. There is a real person there. There are real reactions, real feelings. So mindfulness enables us to keep it real, because it is easy to kind of think it's a bit of a fantasy that we're not really next to each other. Mindfulness is also something about the awareness of we're not just doing our own thing. For me, that's quite important. I'm working with a couple of people now that, because they might just do a check-in for 5 minutes each day, and otherwise they don't talk to anybody. They might be talking on Slack or talking on a messaging app or email. They then feel like they're alone. But what we need to do is that awareness of, I can actually pick up the phone, and I can talk to someone, I can reach out. So rather than feeling I'm just doing my own work, because another problem that can happen is you get lost in your task and you forget that how your tasks interact with somebody else's work, because in Agile, our work is intermeshed, which is a word that I like to use before, is we need to constantly be aware of this piece acts with that piece, so we can keep the bigger picture together of how we are still connected with one another, even though we are just doing our own bit. So it really enables that bigger piece awareness and not to be lost in our own world, I guess.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, great. Thank you, Kathy. That's all the questions I had. It was amazing talking to you. I'm really glad that I got the chance to have this conversation. Thank you for coming on Trundl Talks.
Thank you so much for having me, Sajit, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their day and stays well and safe in these challenging times.
Thank you. Thank you
again.
You too. Take care. Bye.
Thanks.
Hey, 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 Trundl Talks, it's Trundl Talks.